second with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group 2022 edition is scheduled to take place next week in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Ahead of that big annual event, the Lagos Business School today held a leadership program also in Abuja to discuss key issues in leadership and governance. Professor Franklin Ngwu is a member of the faculty of the Lagos Business School. He's also the director in charge of the LBS Public Sector Initiative, and he joins me now live from our Abuja studios. Good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the program tonight.
Good evening, Bosun, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you for making this. It's been a very busy day for you, so we appreciate you making the time this evening, dinner time, to be with us here in the studio. Tell me about the LBS Public Sector Leadership Program today and what you folks were looking to achieve.
As you know, Bosun, for over 30 years, LBS has been focusing in developing responsible leadership in Nigeria. But we also know that we've been focusing more to the private sector. So based on reports we're getting, based on the feedbacks we're getting, our stakeholders are telling us that given what you've achieved in the private sector or what you are doing in the private sector in terms of developing responsible leadership, it's time for us also to start looking at the public sector. Because we know that for Nigeria to move forward, for Nigeria to really be the giant of Africa, there is a need for that effectiveness of both private sector and public sector. So the essence of LBS Public Sector Leadership Program is more or less for us to see how we can partner with the public sector to develop responsible leaders that will take Nigeria to where it's supposed to be. We already know how Nigeria is in terms of the state of things, insecurity, unemployment, inflation, and other social problems that we have in Nigeria. So what we are trying to do is to see how we can discuss, train, and with our public sector in terms of how do we, first of all, develop responsible leadership and administration, how do we rethink policy implementation for sustainable development, and how do we also rethink stakeholder engagement and collaboration. And we believe that if we're able to do this with the public sector, Nigeria will be able to have a better outcome, we'll be able to have better inclusive sustainable growth, because it means that the public sector and the private sector will always be on the same page. So that's the main focus of the LBS Public Sector Leadership Program that we're trying to do. And we're also doing it in partnership with Singapore University, principally the Ngwu Business School. So there are going to be 3 key teams in Nigeria, and the 4th one will be in Singapore. So we're more or less looking at permanent secretaries, directors, assistant directors, CEOs and DGs of different agencies of government, so that because we believe that the politicians normally provide policy direction, but in terms of the execution of those policies, it has to be done by the public servants. So it's important that they understand the issues of strategy, national planning, execution, leadership, ethics, accountability, responsibility, and all this will be put together, are being put together in this program, so that when they come out, they can be said to be responsible, accountable, and effective leaders.
Well, what the Lagos Business School is doing is flowing into raising the curtain on the NESG 2022 summit next week, which you're going to be part of there in Abuja. What's the main thrust at this point?
Of course, NESG, the annual summit, is normally a very important summit to really rethink Nigeria and to provide some clear perspectives and ideas in terms of what government can focus on. So this year, the theme is 2023 and beyond, priorities for shared prosperity. So it's more or less that NESG is saying that we have been doing this for some years. We also know some of the outcomes that we've been achieving. But the importance of this one is because that, of course, you know, next year we're going to be having a new government come May 2023. So NESG is saying, let us rethink some of these priorities that will enable and ensure that we have inclusive and sustainable Nigeria. So it's going to more or less focus maybe using about 5 key plenaries, about 20 breakout sessions to really rethink some of the issues that will help us to really achieve a better Nigeria. So the first session will be in terms of Nigeria we want. We already know the kind of Nigeria we want. We want Nigeria that is inclusive, that is sustainable, that unemployment is minimal, that insecurity is almost eliminated, where inflation is low, where the monetary policy and the fiscal policy are working together. So that will be the first plenary session in terms of really rethinking and reiterating the Nigeria we want. But of course, you know, Nigeria we want cannot be achieved by the federal government alone. It has to be done in collaboration with the state government, with the local government. So it will also look at subnational perspectives on economic vitality. So that we now rethink how the states will also contribute and their responsibility to ensure that we have the Nigeria we want. That will now take us to the issue of rethinking responsible, accountable leadership. That will be the third plenary session. And then the fourth one will be saying, for us to be productive, for our productivity to increase in Nigeria, of course, you know the state of the economy, it means that we have to be more productive. So we have to rethink the productivity, the workforce that's going forward. And then, how do we execute the Nigerian project? So that will be the 5 plenary sessions. But as I said earlier on, there will also be about 20 breakout sessions that will help us to achieve Nigeria we want.
Very interesting how you put this, summarize the key sessions for us. But the leadership of the NESG has met with the Vice President, who advised that discussions at the summit should focus on pressing issues. What are these pressing issues that you think Mr. Vice President was talking about?
Just 1 minute, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. We can hear you clearly, Lagos.
Okay, so basically, the Vice President commended the NESG for the good work that they've been doing, but he's also very concerned with some of the immediate challenges that we are having. So he mentioned issues of inflation and foreign exchange control, and of course, other immediate issues will relating to issues of insecurity and all that. So while the Vice President is correct that some of these issues are very urgent, but of course you also know that even though they are very urgent, there are consequences of certain actions or inactions. So they are related. But I mean, what the Vice President is saying is very, very important, but they are also, they can also be linked to other factors that are medium-term, long-term, and all that. So NESG is going to be looking at both the short-term, which the Vice President is looking at, and also the medium and long term, because you know government is a continuum and it's not something that you just focus on being reactive.
Well, do you think the summit next week can deliver on some of the key issues that the current administration can still work on before his departure middle of next year? Mr. Vice President, talk about exchange rate, talk about inflation. These are issues that are very pressing, as it were, for not even for the government, but for every Nigerian, as it were.
Of course, the summit definitely will provide ideas and suggestions in terms of what the current government can do that will actually lead to the next government. So the issue of inflation and foreign exchange, remember also that NESG is a think tank. So they will provide these ideas, but it's now left for the government to implement some of these ideas. Issue of inflation and foreign exchange are clearly monetary policy issues that are more or less left for the central bank to do. So the NESG will definitely suggest good ideas in terms of what they can do. So the issue, of course, to tame inflation and to also look at issues of foreign exchange is that for the central bank in collaboration with the fiscal authorities, which is more or less the Vice President and the ministers and the executive. But the NESG will also look at the other issues. For instance, we are seeing what is going on in the power sector, where encouragingly and commendably, they are now saying that even the subnationals can now go into generation, transmission, and distribution. So it means that there are certain areas which I'm sure that the summit will also highlight, which will help the current government to actually start some of these things, or even erase or continue what they are doing in some of these certain key areas that will enable the next government to come in. So of course you see what happened with regards to flooding. So the federal government can now start saying, by next year, the kind of flooding we had this year will never happen again, by rethinking some of the issues that are supposed to take in terms of addressing the issue of flooding, because we are not supposed to have flooding in Nigeria to the level that we've had. Nigeria, the Economic Summit Group will also be looking at the issue that is going on with regards to unemployment, regards to insecurity. So the summit will also come up with ideas to say, for instance, the insecurity can actually be tackled in Nigeria, but maybe better the state government, local government, collaborating with the federal government. For instance, clearing all the bushes, for instance, bulldozing the forest, for instance, providing better security, for instance, increasing the level of security personnel. So all these issues will be raised and provided, I believe, by the summit in terms of making sure that Nigeria is a better place. Because as I said earlier on, the first thing that we are looking at or reiterating is Nigeria we want. And we all know the kind of Nigeria we want. So the summit will also provide guidelines in terms of what and how and when some of the things that we're supposed to do to start implementing some of these things from now to next year when a new government comes in.
All right, well, thank you so much for this conversation, and we wish you all the best. Have a great evening there in Abuja. Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School.